Hey guys, Level Cap here, and I believe the next Battlefield game may very well be the most important title the franchise has seen in a long time. We're at a turning point in Battlefield's history, and depending on what aspects of the game you enjoy, it could be an amazing shift or the end of the franchise for you. Battlefield 1 was a divisive title to say the least. It's been overall a highly successful game, bringing in new players and introducing new mechanics, but also it's been one of the least popular games among veteran fans of the franchise. Now, I don't have detailed stats to back up this claim, but only experience of talking to everyone I know or met who has been a fan of Battlefield 3 and 4. When they talk about Battlefield 1, it's often a game that they lost interest in quickly or can cite specific reasons as to why they stopped playing it completely. The reason that veterans have lost interest in Battlefield 1 does tend to vary. A common complaint is the history shift that many of them can't get on board with. Early 1900s weaponry doesn't appeal to everyone, especially milsim or modern military shooter fans. Bad Company, Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, Battlefield Hardline all had modern guns, so the shift could have certainly caught those who are comfortable in the modern era of weapons off guard. Then there's the most common thing I hear, which is the shift in grenade spam, mortar spam, explosion spam. The addition of gas grenades and weapon spread mechanics drove them away from the franchise that was more or less using a familiar system for the past 10 years. Taking a group of players that has enjoyed the shooting mechanics of a game since the Bad Company era and shifting it up in a drastic way is an easy way to lose a core player base. I myself have noticed that the shooting practices of Battlefield 1 actually make me worse at other shooters that put a big emphasis on getting headshots with fully automatic weapons. The gunplay in BF1 encourages shooting center mass due to the massive spread and accuracy issues on most guns. Grenade throw speed and detonation timing, even though nerfed significantly since launch, is still faster and worse than previous Battlefield games. These are all the things that for me as a veteran player irk me the most and make me long for the days of old. However, the question of course becomes, do the old warhorses of the franchise even matter at this point, or has EA already accepted that they may have lost those players to games like Rainbow Six Siege and PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds? Also, investors can only be happy with the success of Battlefield 1, so why risk changing that formula? From a business standpoint, it doesn't make sense to take a big risk and change the gameplay mechanics yet again. But DICE, if anything, has been unpredictable, or inconsistent depending on how much credit you'd like to give them. Because Battlefield 1 is the first game to implement so many of these balance changes, I think many people are hopeful that the game mechanics may revert in Battlefield 2018. Perhaps DICE will decide that they went too far with the changes in Battlefield 1, and the next game will hone back on what people liked about the previous games. That's certainly a nice thought, and we of course won't know until playing the next Battlefield title, but I'm personally not holding out too much hope for this magical shift back to the glory days. And when I say glory days, I do mean the glory days for me and many of the people I know. There is of course a whole new genre of Battlefield gamers who Battlefield 1 may have been their first game and really the thing that they use as the benchmark for what makes a good Battlefield experience. Now, the main reason that I think the next Battlefield title isn't going to make a drastic shift back towards the way that old games played is because there was a huge number of sales for Battlefield 1. Sure, it hasn't had great player retention, but then again, that seems to be the way most Battlefield games go. High sales and a rapidly declining player base. From a business perspective, you want to replicate that success, and although it might be hard for an investor or a producer to understand why Battlefield 1 sold so well, they might attribute a lot of that to the actual game design changes rather than the incredibly attractive marketing schemes and visual spectacle of Battlefield 1. The rapidly declining player base model has proven to be successful for them so far, and so investing in sequels has been a staple for Battlefield and Call of Duty. They've become quite comfortable with their sequel mentalities for development and not really working on games as services, and the player base for the most part knows this. Once the core production of a Battlefield game is complete, the DLC production is shifted to a different team, and most of the company's resources are put into designing the next game in the franchise. This has resulted in rushed DLC, failure to deliver on promised features, a period of a year or more in which it takes DICE to iron out and fix some of the game's biggest problems, and a player base that often feels somewhat neglected. So far, the model has been working for EA, but it's one that I think people are growing tired of. Looking at games like Rainbow Six Siege that started out very rocky, but then the dev team fully committed to the title, and rather than focusing on a sequel, saw the potential of putting a full dev team on updating and adding new content to the base game, has turned it into an amazing success story. In fact, if you look at other Ubisoft titles right now, they've gone through a similar process of relatively rocky or buggy starts, but with massive development support post-launch. I think Ubisoft is starting to understand that their post-launch support of a game and treating games more as services rather than one-and-done launch titles is becoming a great way to improve the respect or view of their company and how much people are interested in investing in their future games. I really hope that this pays off for Ubisoft because it's absolutely excellent for the consumer. We get a much better product in the long run, and even games like The Division, people are saying, is now actually excellent and it's sort of perfect, and they're taking everything they learned from improving and modifying The Division and putting it into their next title. So again, comparing games like Rainbow Six Siege and Battlefield 1, where Rainbow Six started off with a much weaker, smaller player base, has actually multiplied that player base by almost a factor of 10, and it now boasts a daily player count stronger of those of the first week of launch of Battlefield 1, whereas Battlefield 1's first week and month were very strong, and then we just have a rapidly declining player base. Two completely different approaches to game development, but I think it's pretty obvious which one gamers prefer. It's just a question of which one's more profitable for game developers. But I can imagine if you're working on a product or a title, it's not very rewarding knowing that that title's got a very short lifespan. Who knows though, maybe this will all shift up with the next Battlefield game. Many fans of the franchise are a bit perplexed by Incursions, DICE's attempt at turning Battlefield 1 into a competitive shooter. The game mode isn't even out of alpha, and we're already ramping up for the announcement of Battlefield 2018 in June. So what exactly is the game plan here? Is Battlefield 1 going to have a massive esports explosion between the release of Incursions, which we don't know when that will be, and the release of Battlefield 2018 in October? Of course it won't, especially based on the responses I've seen from Incursions, which at best can be summed up as, it's okay, I guess. Maybe the game plan is to turn Battlefield titles into seasonal-like content, and Incursions will exist throughout each season or era of Battlefield. It's really hard to say what they're trying to do with Incursions. DICE's attempt to turn Battlefield into a competitive shooter at this point in time is confusing to say the least. The franchise's golden ticket to a competitive scene was its nuanced environmental destruction being integrated into more complex squad-based strategy. That would have been perfect back in 2011 or back with even Bad Company 2. But now Rainbow Six Siege has taken that formula and really perfected it into something Battlefield will never be able to compete with, and there doesn't seem to be much point in trying to replicate the same thing. The biggest hurdle the franchise faces with trying to turn it into an esport is that the appeal and player base of the game is focused on large format casual game modes. I can't think of any highly popular esports game in which the competitive mode is drastically different from the casual mode. For Battlefield, it's like designing two different games and trying to convince the player base that it's really the same game and that one mode is just for competitive play. Since 2011, which again in my opinion was the ideal year to try and push Battlefield and esports, we now have Rainbow Six Siege, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, Fortnite, Overwatch, and CSGO, which has grown about 14 times bigger in popularity since then, all competing in the shooter genre for esports viewership. All of those games except for Counter-Strike didn't even exist in 2011, and CSGO had a daily player peak of 50,000 players compared to its 700,000 player peaks today. The idea of Incursions taking away esports viewership is a bit laughable at this point. I only bring it up because it's an oddity in the Battlefield 1 development cycle, which seems to be separate from the rest of what's going on and may indicate future plans for the next Battlefield title. Again, it's really hard to understand what DICE's long-term plans are with incursions and how that's going to translate into the next Battlefield game. So, coming back to my main point of Battlefield 2018 being one of the most important titles in Battlefield history, I mostly mean that for veteran players of the past 9 to 10 years. If you're hoping that Battlefield 2018 will go back to its roots with a bigger emphasis on gunplay versus grenade play, and game modes meticulously designed into the overall map layout, then really all we can do at this point is hold our breath and hope. I know that I'm not the only one waiting for that much needed shift. I imagine that Call of Duty players tired of the wall running mechanics that dominated the franchise for several years felt the same way, and in the end that franchise did go back and re-examine its roots, so perhaps Battlefield will do the same. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Do you hope DICE will continue with the new mechanics introduced in Battlefield 1, or would you like a bit of a shift back to what was established over the previous 9 to 10 years? As always guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.